Hi and welcome to this AEAF talk on feature film complexity on a student budget. My name is Daniel Flood. I'm technical lead at UTS Animalogic Academy. I have a background in animation and visual effects and experience in pipeline software development, lighting and surfacing. As a teacher, I'm also the subject of many student memes. This is a thing that comes with the territory. Every year my face is a new meme. So just very briefly, what is UTS Animalogic Academy? It's a partnership between Animalogic and the University of Technology, Sydney. Our course is a one-year Masters of Animation and Visualization. The students learn in a simulated industry context from industry professionals, and we have a very good graduate employment rate. Just a very brief showreel of some of our work. So this talk is going to center around a film called The Bounty Hunter. This was our 2019 student animation project. Just to very quickly show you some clips. So there's a few shots here where I'm showing you the concept art, followed by the previs. Then you're going to see a wireframe render, and then a textured render, and then the final lighting. I just thought I'd show you a lot of visual material in this talk. One of the things about our course is that we're not subject to MPAA type copyright restrictions, so we're free to sort of show a lot of the making of material. So I'm trying to get quite a bit of that into this talk, just because it's kind of cool to sort of see the background development of this stuff. It's, you know, if you work in a commercial studio, it's kind of a nightmare trying to get sign off on all this stuff. So with each of these, you're seeing first off the concept art, followed by the previs. Then this is a wireframe render of the final animation with textures, and final lighting and compositing. So what is the Bounty Hunter? It's a student project from 2019. It consisted of 39 shots, 243 assets, 4 sets, 64 FX tasks, 4 minutes running time, 28 students, and 33 weeks. Just for comparison, compared to the previous year, I'm not going to read out all of these numbers, but it's more than the previous year. So we've got double the number of shots, 1.3 the number of assets, double the number of sets, nearly twice as many FX tasks, 2.5 running time, and the same number of students in the same time frame to complete it. So this posed quite a challenge for us in terms of how we were going to pull this off. So, I mean, there's a few factors to this, but a very large one of them was we had an efficient pipeline that reduces repetitive manual tasks. So we have a push pipeline where new assets make their own way downstream. Artists don't have to ensure that their set pieces are up to date for each shot, and we reduce the management overhead of making sure people have updated their scenes. All of our shot contents are encapsulated in a USD shot description. We use USD for all of the renderable cache information, so animation caches, camera caches, etc. We also had automated quality control renders, and we use sequence-based lighting. And the sort of the core theme under all this is a highly parallel workflow. Before we go into too much detail, let's look at some cool images. So here's some art and design from the project. So these are early concept art that went a long way to establishing the look and feel of the film, as well as storyboarding. So these concept art images were very key in establishing layouts and lighting design references later on. Just looking at a few asset turntables. So this is our hero character, the bounty hunter. For our surfacing, we use Substance Painter and Substance Designer for our texturing workflow. And surfacing artists use Katana and RenderMan to build up sort of modular shader networks and do their turntable rendering inside Katana. So this project had quite a lot of rock crystals, and we made heavy use of Katana macros in terms of having a sort of something that kind of encapsulates complexity and provides a simplified user interface, so that people can, you can have one person doing the sort of R&D on the crystal shader, and then they can hand that over to other people fairly easily. Just very briefly, I might show this sort of comparison once again, because we can fairly easily show this content without any copyright issues. So on the left, you're seeing sort of previs or very early layouts, and on the right hand side, you're seeing the final render. For any potentially students in the audience, I think this is a pretty interesting reference in terms of how close the very early previs layout is to the final product. It's interesting to see how on the left hand side you're seeing stuff that's looks sort of crude essentially, but you can see in the final image it was very faithful to that in terms of the composition of the shot, the timing of what's happening. And I think again, for any students watching this talk, something that's kind of worth taking away from this is that the stuff on the left hand side, we're not even really attempting to make it look good. Like the assets are very clearly work in progress, or not even that really. The animation is just like super basic. You'll see a shot here in a second where look, his arms aren't even moving. And then once again, it's totally static. And the point there that I'm making is that, for any students in the audience, if you want to make a good film, it's important that you can start blocking in shots and camera compositions without fussing too much about the look and feel of assets. Okay, so just coming back to the efficient pipeline that reduces repetitive manual tasks. So the highly parallel workflow was a really key aspect of that. So let's talk about that in some more detail. So you've probably already all seen this fairly conventional pipeline diagram, where it shows a bunch of boxes connected together one after the other. So art and design, modeling, layout, animation, effects, lighting, comp. This diagram is true in a sense, in that if you are a digital asset and you are flowing through the pipeline, this is a fairly true diagram. However, this diagram can be quite misleading in terms of what humans do in the production. So just to reiterate, say you're a model for a character or something, this is a truthful representation of how you experience the data flow. Whereas for a human being working in the production, it's something more like this, where every department is kind of working all at the same time on various iterations. They constantly publish their updates to the asset management system, and then in the next iteration they pull the updates from the asset management system, and so on and so on. So this is what we mean by a highly parallel workflow. So what this means, just a few examples. So set building can start before models are finished. Shot layout starts before set building is finished. Animation can start before layout is finished, and lighting can start before animation finished, and so on. This is just a really interesting example of this is the first shot that we lit on this project, and it's just going to quickly play through all of the revisions from start to final. What's interesting about this is that the very first passes of lighting, you can see in that shot just before, there's a lot of missing textures, there's a lot of issues with assets, the foreground character has no fur, and this is a kind of interesting, I mean, anyone from a production will be aware of this, but for anyone wanting to get into production, if you're working as a lighter, for example, you have to get used to starting off lighting with a lot of things being incomplete, and that as you keep on working through your iterations, you're getting asset updates coming through all the time, and so you'll start to see more and more textures as it comes towards completion. Okay, let's just move on to an aspect of detail, which is Universal Scene Description, or USD, which is a technology made by Pixar and experiencing fairly wide uptake across the industry. Just a quick visual example, because I think visual examples are really great. So this is a little utility called USD View, which you can compile for yourself if you want to. And what we're looking at here is a shot cache. So this is a particular shot's shot description, and we're playing back all of the caches for that shot in USD View. So we started off looking through the shot camera, but then we've decided to just go and spin around, and it's kind of cool. You can like watch the animation from different angles. We've also just turned on the RenderMan Hydra Delegate, so now we're getting like an interactive RenderMan render with textures. It's obviously a bit slower than the OpenGL render, but it's still pretty nifty. So you can dolly the camera around, get an update. So you can think of this as a little bit like a kind of Playblast Plus, you can get the benefits of like, say, an animation Playblast, but you can also, move around the scene and isolate things and focus on things and dolly the camera around, etc. So now we're just looking at the same set in Maya. So a very big part of the appeal of USD is we can easily transport data between applications. So a USD set or a USD shot description, we can open it up in Maya fairly easily. So this is just playing through the shot camera with the little dolly forwards. And then we can do the same thing in Houdini quite easily. So this is using the LOPS context in Houdini 18, which is a native USD context. So we've imported this USD set into Houdini. And what's good about this is you can quite easily have the same set with reference geometry come into a large number of different DCC applications. And so again, in Solaris, Houdini Solaris, we can turn on the RenderMan viewport delegate, and we're seeing a little interactive path trace render with textures there. As of quite recently, Nuke has added USD support. We actually didn't use this on Bounty Hunter, but I just threw in a little quick demonstration of the same thing. So the theme that's coming through is essentially, it's quite neat to be able to have a scene description, including textures, travel between different applications. And this is in Katana where we do our lighting. So on the left-hand side, you're seeing an interactive render, and on the right-hand side, we're moving around the OpenGL viewport. Okay, so just to dive into a little bit of detail on USD. So this is not necessarily the canonical truth of USD, it's more how we are using it. I do believe the way we're using it is pretty much in line with Pixar usage. However, like any software, there's many ways you can use something, so this is going to be how we use it. So we use USD to have a a USD document called a set, which references a bunch of set pieces being static geometry. This is very much similar to Maya referencing. The difference being that Maya referencing is stored in Maya files, so only Maya can read those. This, on the other hand, is like a universal version of the same thing that can be read by any software. So after we build up a set or even a couple of sets, which each reference some set pieces, we can then have a shot description that reference those sets. So here we've got a layout shot description referencing two USD sets. Then actually, sorry, that's like an asset document. And then we can have a shot description referencing a bunch of different USD caches. So in the case of the camera, it's going to be a camera cache. For effects, it's often going to be a bunch of FX caches. For the characters, we have animated caches. And then you can have references to the sets and then further down to the set pieces. So another thing that USD allows us to do that's quite nifty is you can set overrides on things that are flowing through. So in this slide here, you can see at the layout, we're referencing two sets. A layout artist in our pipeline can grab a set piece and move it or hide it or translate it or scale it. And that's going to be stored in the USD document as an override. So you can see here there's an example of what a USD override looks like. Just a really quick look at like what a USD document actually looks like. Now you don't need to really make sense of all of this, so I've highlighted a few key things. Essentially, this is kind of similar to what you might do in something like Maya, where you build up a hierarchy of transforms with geometry under them. So in green, we've got the name of the set. In red, we're referencing something, so that's same concept as a Maya reference. The thing I've underlined in blue is a query for our custom asset resolver turret. So we're not referencing by a file path here, we're referencing by a custom query. In purple, we've got a group node or a transform essentially. This is basically the same thing as in Maya. You can grab a bunch of bits of geometry, put them under a transform, and it can be a useful way to lay things out. And then in yellow, you can see some geometry reference that's nested under that transform, same as you would do in Maya. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how through USD we have dynamic asset resolution via our in-house software called Turret. But first off, let's just talk a little bit about why. So here's a scenario. Have you ever found yourself in this situation? You're using a CG set that references hundreds of assets by file path. The assets are constantly being updated in modeling. The set has to be constantly manually updated just to ensure everything is up to date. This is bad for a few reasons. All users of the set are individually responsible for pulling updates daily. You might get asked in dailies what version of an asset you're rendering. Production spend half of the time managing communication and compliance of asset updates. You might get asked crazy things like, use version 21 of the rock in shot A, but use version 15 of it in shot B because it looks better in that shot. So this is our solution to this problem. So this is a fairly technical looking diagram. Let's just walk through it fairly quickly. So essentially we have a custom USD asset resolver plugin called Turret, and it allows us to reference set pieces or anything really via a custom query instead of a file path. So just to kind of break down this query, there's some color coding. So this is essentially pretty similar to a URL that you might experience on a web browser. And you can see there's a little box there that shows the tokens in that query. So we're saying that the step is a model, task is a model, the asset type is a set piece, we want the latest version, and the asset name is building02. Our custom asset resolver plugin for USD, it interprets that bit about the version being latest, and it finds the latest version on disk and returns that file path. What this means for artists is that publishers can go live straight away. If you open a set, you will get the latest assets available at that time. If you open the same set later, you will get new assets. So layout, animation, lighting, and effects don't know or care about what version of a rock is in their work. It's always simply the latest asset at that time. If things are broken by bad publishers, it's very apparent and they get fixed quickly. This approach places ownership of publishers on the person who publishes them, not on the downstream artist to manage it, i.e. you break it, you fix it. Let's just look through a quick example of this is the same shot we saw before, but this is looking through all of the various animation versions from start to approval, to start to final. And again, what's interesting here is you can see the set coming along. So what's interesting here is the animator is actually not doing anything to update this set in between iterations. So each day they come in and open up their work, the set just gets updated, and it's not something that they have to be really cognizant of or even really opting into. And you can see that, while the animation is getting better, the set's also getting better as well. So essentially that's freeing up the animator from the kind of data management tasks. If you're interested in this, you can check out on our GitHub page. The Turret software is available as open source, and there are some studios that we've heard that are using it in production, which is pretty cool. We also made heavily use of automated quality control renders. Lighters are often abused as QC renderers for assets. In terms of lighting is often the first part of the process where you start to see assets getting rendered through your chosen renderer. It's a bad idea to make lighters QC artists because lighting renders are very expensive. They take a lot of money to render and time on the render farm. RenderMan gives integrators like the Pixar visualizer, which is a very fast way to render a sort of basic representation of a shot. We use a combination of USD, Turret, and Katana to make this pretty easy. All of our shot data is captured in a shot USD. So in terms of like loading the shot, there's just one document to load. Asset Resolver Turret ensures that anytime you render, you'll get all the latest assets. The Katana node network to do this is quite simple. So this is the same shot again. We're looking through all of the various QC renders from start to finish. So you can see early on there's a lot of missing textures, and also not a lot of detail in the set. And as time goes by, there's going to be a lot of updates coming through. So we ran these overnight, and each morning we'd kind of eagerly check. And it's a good kind of reality check just in terms of having people be able to see the state of the production at any given time. And if someone thinks they've published something and it doesn't show up in this, that means they have to go and figure out what went wrong. So why are these automated QC renders good? They avoid wasting artists' time. It's a ground truth that everyone can agree on. So in terms of, if people say, no, I published that, you haven't updated, it's a good way to get around that and say, nope, you didn't publish it because you can't see it here. It also avoids the kind of thing that I like to call version abuse, where different versions of an asset are treated as different variants. It's a personal opinion, but I think it's a terrible crime when people start saying, I need this version of the asset in this scene, but I need a different version of that scene. That's crazy. That's where you need variance in your pipeline. So just jumping on to virtual production, which we made significant use of in this project as well. We have so this is on the left hand side, this is our former staff member Ben Skinner, and Ben was our pipeline TD last year who built this virtual production system. So on the right hand side you're seeing Julian, who's a student from last year, operating the camera rig. So it's a shoulder mounted camera rig with a HTC Vive tracker and a little LCD screen for display, which you'll see in a second. There we go. So this is now Ian operating the camera, and you can see as he moves around, he's able to position the camera physically with his body. Don't mind the duct tape and PVC piping. We're big believers in rapid prototyping, and nothing says rapid prototyping quite like duct tape and PVC. So what's great about this system is you can capture the kind of little subtle movements of parallax and rotation that are very hard to simulate with just a simple kind of noise function in Maya. This gives the camera movements a very kind of lifelike quality that is not really obvious unless you know what you're looking for, but if you experience its absence, you can see the benefit. I'm personally of the opinion that a lot of CG productions, especially lower budget ones, tend to fall apart on, kind of not quite naturalistic cameras. So here's a bunch of examples of, this is the same shot before we had a virtual production camera. So if you look at the edges of the image, it's very static. Now this is with the virtual production camera. There's not really a ton of movement. Like if you just saw this shot, it wouldn't really jump out at you. And again with this one, this is pre-VP, not much movement, and then with VP, this is the subtle shake. Again, it's not quite the same thing as just having like an animated noise function, because you're getting like a little 6 degrees of freedom, is in that it's not simply rotating. It's like, there's a little bit of push forwards and a little bit of parallax. So that concludes the talk. If you have any further questions, would like to get in touch, you can email us at the email address shown below, and you can follow us on all of the major social media platforms. Thanks for listening, and I hope to hear from you soon.